Hello guys, welcome back to Basketball Fan. This is your girl Cordy back again with another video, and listen, we've got to talk because the situation around the Indiana Fever is starting to feel a little too familiar. Almost like we're watching the same story play out all over again, just with higher stakes, more pressure, and way more eyes on it this time around. And if you've been following this team closely, then you already know exactly what I'm talking about because Stephanie White is. Right back on that same message that had people raising eyebrows last year, and now that clip is making rounds again, going viral, sparking debates, and honestly, it's got fans questioning everything about the direction of this team heading into the 2025 season. Because when you really sit down and listen to what's being said, and more importantly, what's not being said, it paints a picture that might not sit well with everyone, especially when you've got a generational talent like Caitlin Clark in the mix. So let's break this all the way down, because when Stephanie White talks about Kelsey Mitchell being the #1 priority in free agency, emphasizing how important she is to everything they're trying to build, highlighting her ability to just go out there and get a bucket without needing help, that's not just casual praise, that's a statement, that's a message, and the way it came across, both then and now, makes it sound like the offense is still very much centered around Kelsey. Like this is still being positioned as her team, and that's where things start to get complicated, because you don't bring in a player like Caitlin Clark, someone who changes the entire dynamic of a franchise, someone who instantly becomes the face of the league, someone who draws national attention every single time she steps on the court, just to have her play secondary in a system that doesn't fully revolve around her strengths, and that's the tension fans are starting to feel again, because it's not just about who can score, it's about identity, it's about direction, it's about who this team is actually being built around, and when you hear Stephanie White echoing similar sentiments as before, it naturally raises questions. It makes people wonder if the Fever are truly ready to evolve or if they're stuck trying to balance two very different visions at the same time, and that's where the speculation starts creeping in, because now you've got people talking, really talking about Caitlin Clark's long-term future with the organization, and whether she could eventually reach a point where she's not fully satisfied with how things are being run. And look, nobody is saying she's packing her bags tomorrow. Nobody is confirming anything. But the idea of a potential trade request down the line? That's not coming out of nowhere. That's coming from patterns, from messaging, from the way this whole situation is unfolding, and if you're the Fever, that's something you cannot afford to ignore, because you don't get too many chances with a player like Caitlin Clark. You don't get too many opportunities to build something truly special, and if there's even a slight disconnect between the coaching philosophy and your franchise cornerstone, that's something that has to be addressed immediately. Not later, not after the season, not when things start going south, but right now, and when Stephanie White speaks in that recent interview about being smart, about managing expectations, about Caitlin working hard in the off-season, gaining game exposure with USA basketball, having rhythm and timing, all of that is great. All of that is important, but it still doesn't fully answer the biggest question on everyone's mind, which is how exactly this offense is going to function when the season starts, because fans aren't just looking for reassurance, they're looking for clarity. They want to know if this team is finally going to lean into what makes Caitlin Clark special, or if we're going to see a repeat of last year where things felt a little disjointed, a little uncertain, a little too safe for a team that should be pushing boundaries. And that's why this moment feels so critical, because the Fever are at a crossroads. Whether they want to admit it or not, they're balancing veteran presence with young superstar potential. They're trying to build continuity while also evolving, and that's not easy, but it's necessary. And the decisions they make right now, the tone they set, the system they commit to, all of that is going to shape not just this season, but the entire future of the franchise, because if they get it right, if they truly build around Caitlin in a way that maximizes her impact while still utilizing players like Kelsey Mitchell effectively, this team could be dangerous. They could be exciting. They could become must-watch basketball every single night. But if they get it wrong, if the messaging continues to feel mixed, if the system doesn't fully align with their biggest asset, then yeah, the noise is only going to get louder. The questions are only going to get tougher, and the idea of Caitlin Clark eventually wanting something different is going to become harder and harder to dismiss, and that's why fans are paying such close attention right now. That's why every interview, every quote, every hint matters, because they're trying to read between the lines. They're trying to figure out where this is all heading before it actually unfolds, and you can't blame them for that, because they've seen how quickly things can shift in this league. They've seen how important it is to get the foundation right from the beginning, and right now, the Fever are still writing that story. They're still defining who they are, and whether they realize it or not, the spotlight is firmly on them, and every move they make is being watched, analyzed, and debated. And that's just the reality when you have a player like Caitlin Clark on your roster. So yeah, maybe this is nothing. Maybe everything works out perfectly. Maybe the system clicks, the roles become clear, and the Fever take that next big step. But until we actually see it happen, until we see how this all translates on the court, the questions aren't going anywhere, the speculation isn't going anywhere, and moments like this interview are only going to keep fueling the conversation. So stay locked in, because this story is far from over, and you already know we're going to be right here breaking it all down every step of the way on Basketball Fan. Alright guys, welcome back to Basketball Fan. This is your girl Cordy, and we've got to have a real conversation today because the more I listen to this interview, the more I sit with what Stephanie White actually said, the more something just doesn't feel right. And I'm not saying that lightly. I'm saying that as somebody who has been watching this situation develop step by step, piece by piece, and now we're starting to see a pattern form that fans cannot ignore anymore, because when ahead, coach starts talking about managing reps, limiting practice load, ramping a player up slowly, especially when that player is someone like Caitlin Clark, it immediately grabs your attention. It makes you pause. And it makes you ask some serious questions about what the actual plan is here, because let's be very clear about something from the jump. This is not just any player we're talking about. This is a generational talent. This is someone who has already shown at every single level that she is ready for the moment, that she thrives under pressure, that she doesn't need to be eased into anything, and yet here we are listening to messaging that sounds like the organization is preparing to take a more cautious, maybe even restrictive approach. And that's where the tension starts to build, because on one hand, you understand the logic of managing a long season. You understand that the WNBA schedule is no joke, 44 games, heavy weekly cadence, travel, physical toll. All of that matters. And yes, from a purely strategic standpoint, it makes sense to protect your players, to make sure they're not overworked, to ensure they peak at the right time. Nobody is arguing against that. But on the other hand, when you apply that logic specifically to Caitlin Clark, it starts to feel a little different. It starts to feel like maybe, just maybe, they're overthinking this situation, and that's where fans begin to get uneasy. Because we've already seen what she looks like when she's fully unleashed. We've already seen the pace, the confidence, the control, the way she dictates the game, and it doesn't look like someone who needs to be held back. It looks like someone you build everything around, and that's why this whole idea of limiting reps or managing exposure becomes such a hot topic, because it can easily be interpreted as taking the ball out of her hands, as reshaping her role, as trying to fit her into a system instead of building a system around her. And if that's what's happening, even in the early stages, then yeah, that's going to raise eyebrows, that's going to spark debate, and that's exactly what we're seeing right now across the fan base, because people are connecting the dots. They're remembering last year's messaging about Kelsey Mitchell being the focal point. They're hearing similar tones now, and they're starting to wonder if history is about to repeat itself. And let's not pretend like that wouldn't be a big deal, because when you have a player like Caitlin Clark, you don't treat her like a piece of the puzzle. You treat her like the centerpiece. You treat her like the foundation, and anything less than that is going to feel like a misstep. And that's why this conversation is getting louder. Because it's not just about practice reps, it's about philosophy. It's about identity. It's about whether this team truly understands what they have and how to maximize it. And when you contrast Stephanie White's comments with what we actually saw from Caitlin Clark during that international stretch, the difference becomes even more striking, because Clark herself made it clear she feels great. She's not worried about her body. She's put in the work. She's confident. She's ready to go. And that's not just talk. That's backed up by performance. That's backed up by what we all watched with our own eyes. The way she controlled the game, the way she created opportunities, the way she scored from anywhere on the floor, the way she elevated everyone around her. That's not someone who looks like they need to be dialed back. That's someone who looks like they're ready to take over. And so when you hear about potentially scaling things down, it naturally creates friction. It creates that feeling of, wait, why are we fixing something that isn't broken? And that's the core of the concern right there, because sometimes in sports, over-adjustment can be just as dangerous as under-preparation. Sometimes trying to be too smart, too cautious, too strategic can actually take away the very thing that makes a player special. And with Caitlin Clark, that special factor is her freedom, her ability to play instinctively, to push the pace, to take risks, to create magic in real time. And if you start to limit that, even with good intentions, you risk dulling the edge that makes her elite. And that's not a risk this team should be willing to take, not at this stage, not with this kind of talent. And that's why fans are reacting the way they are. That's why people are saying this feels off. Because it's not just about what's being said, it's about how it lines up with everything we've already seen. And right now, those two things don't fully match. And look, maybe there's more context behind the scenes. Maybe the coaching staff has a detailed plan that we're not fully aware of. Maybe this is all part of a bigger strategy that will make sense once the season starts. That's entirely possible. But until we actually see that plan in action, until we see how this team operates on the court, the questions are going to remain. The skepticism is going to remain, because at the end of the day, results are what matter. And if the Fever come out looking fluid, cohesive, and fully built around Caitlin Clark's strengths, then all of this concern will fade away real quick. But if they come out looking hesitant, if the offense feels restricted, if Clark's impact seems reduced in any noticeable way, then yeah, this conversation is going to explode, and it's going to be a lot harder to control. And that's why this moment feels so important, because it's setting the tone for everything that comes next. It's shaping expectations. It's influencing how fans interpret every move, every decision, every rotation, and in today's environment, where everything is analyzed in real time, where every quote gets dissected, you can't afford mixed messaging. You can't afford to leave room for doubt, especially when you're dealing with a player who carries this much attention, this much expectation, and this much potential impact on the league as a whole. And speaking of impact, let's not forget the kind of plays Caitlin Clark has already put on display. We're talking about logo threes, step backs over elite defenders like Breanna Stewart, full court vision leading to highlight reel assists, moments that completely shift momentum and energize not just her team, but the entire arena. Those aren't just flashy plays. Those are game-changing abilities. Those are the kinds of skills that force defenses to adjust, that open up opportunities for everyone else. And that's exactly why you want the ball in her hands as much as possible, not less. And so when fans hear anything that suggests the opposite, even indirectly, it's going to trigger concern. It's going to make people wonder if the team is fully aligned with what the modern game demands, because let's be honest, the game today is built around dynamic playmakers, around players who can create, score, and facilitate at a high level. And Caitlin Clark fits that mold perfectly, arguably better than anyone else right now. So the idea of limiting her influence, even in small ways, just doesn't sit well. It doesn't match the direction the game is going, and it doesn't match what we've already seen her capable of doing. And that's why this whole situation feels like it's sitting on a knife's edge, because it could go either way. It could turn into a perfectly managed season where Clark stays fresh, dominates when it matters most, and leads this team to new heights.